Moab tempts, Israel sins, God disciplines. A second census is taken as they are nearing the land of promise. The ministry of Moses is coming to a close, the ministry of Joshua is just beginning, and the first 5 to follow Jesus. Today on 3 in 1, as we consider Numbers chapters 25 through 27 and Luke chapter 5. We left off last time with the prostitute prophet, a man named Balaam, who endeavored to sell out his gifts and to sell out his soul for some money. Unsuccessful in his quest to curse Israel, instead he taught Balak how to tempt Israel. If you can't get God to curse them, you can get God to discipline them if you tempt them to sin. So send in your worst women to tempt their best men. And after that sin is conceived, God's discipline will burst forth and you won't even have to fight Israel. God will do that for you. Satan is a slippery serpent, isn't he? If he can't conquer or curse, he'll use compromise. He'll send in his worst to tempt the best of us to fall and then to fall into the discipline of the Lord. Now, as you read through that chapter, Numbers chapter 25, you saw how intense and specific that discipline was and how it ended. One man took drastic measures to end the spreading plague, and that man was commended by God for doing so. Now, as drastic and as dark as all of this seems to be, remember that these Old Testament physical pictures contain New Testament spiritual truths as well. Jesus told us that we are to be drastic with temptation too, getting right to the root of it all and cutting it off quickly before the plague spreads. For temptation leads us into sin, and corruption will spread unless it's dealt with swiftly. So if you sense the serpent sending in his emissaries to tempt you, turn around, walk away, or run away. It's okay. It's not cowardice. It's courage. For we are to flee temptation before it's too late. And unfortunately, it was too late for 24,000 people before Phinehas finally took drastic action to end this temptation and subsequent sin. 24,000 people died in this extremely effective, albeit indirect attack on Israel, implemented by Balak after being instructed by Balaam. 24,000 people died in Israel as Balaam instructed Balak to tempt Israel to sin, which they did, and then God disciplined until Phinehas acted to end all of this. So, lesson learned, be a Phinehas right away. Maybe not in the exact same way, but you get the point, pun intended. We are to be drastic and serious with sin, especially temptation. For think it through, if we consistently, courageously flee temptation, then we will be that much further away from any opportunity to sin. Now in chapter 26, the second census is taken. Israel is nearing the land of promise after years of wandering in the wilderness, God's discipline for their disbelief. The disbelief of an entire generation. So the discipline was that they would wander until that entire generation had died off in the wilderness. So a second census is taken to see if there were any left of that original generation that sinned through unbelief. And in Numbers chapter 27, there was one more mention that would be disciplined because of disbelief. And that man's name was Moses. Remember the rock when God said, "Speak," and instead Moses struck? God said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not believe me to hallow me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them." So we saw God end Aaron in chapter 20, remember? And then now in chapter 27, God gives Moses a message that his ministry was about to end as well. Now here's where we see part of the heart of this man, Moses. Yes, he misrepresented God, and yes, that was a serious sin with serious consequences. But this man Moses was humble, and he definitely had a shepherd's heart for God's people. And here in this chapter, even after being told that he was about to die because of his sin, even before entering into the land that God had promised, his first thought was for the people of God, that they would not be as sheep without a shepherd, saying this in verse 16. "Let the Lord, the God of the spirits of all flesh, set a man over the congregation, who may go out before them and go in before them, who may lead them out and bring them in, that the congregation of the Lord may not be like sheep who have no shepherd." Man, good man, Moses. Well, who's God going to pick? Well, who served side by side with Moses for years now? a man named Joshua, a young man named Joshua, son of Nun. So, in the sight of all Israel, Moses laid his hands on this man Joshua and inaugurated him into this awesome ministry of shepherding, of leading the people of God, the nation of Israel, into the land of promise. Moses' ministry is about to end. Joshua's ministry is about to begin. And as we transition to our New Testament reading in Luke chapter 5, we see the first 5 to follow Jesus in ministry. The first 4 are seen in the first 11 verses. As in the misty early morning light, Jesus approaches the shores of Galilee, followed by a crowd, followed by a congregation, eager to hear what he has to say. Well, there were 4 that day that were not a part of the congregation, because they had to work. They were fishermen, and after fishing all night and catching nothing, they were doing the necessary but discouraging work of washing their nets. Besides, why would this rabbi have any interest in us? We're just simple laborers. We're not theologians. And yet there he is. And he's coming this way. And yep, he's standing in my boat. And he's looking at me. And now he's asking me to take him out into the water? Oh, okay, I get it. He just needs a laborer to labor a little bit more so he can do his preaching thing. I guess I can do that. But then he says, launch out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch. Okay, Jesus, you're a preacher, I'm a fisherman. Why don't you stick to preaching and I'll stick to fishing? The best time to fish is at night, and that's past. And after fishing all night as professionals, we still didn't catch a thing. Oh, he's serious. He's still staring at me. Okay, whatever you say, at your word, we'll go out again. Well, you read what happened next, didn't you? And if you didn't, go crack that book. Read what happened next. And after what happened, Peter is so busted up that he falls at the knees of Jesus and says, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." You ever had that happen? You ever had that happen where you sense God drawing close to you, and he's so gracious to you, he's so good to you, that it actually makes you more aware of just how bad you are? And you don't know what to do except ask God to back up a bit. God, I don't know if you know who I really am. And if you get any closer, you're going to find out that I am so much more sinful than you thought. And yet that's not true. Oh, wait, yes, you are sinful, so much more sinful than you even thought. But God knew that. God knew that all along, and he still called you. He still called you, just like he called Peter and James and John. In the world's eyes, sinful sailors, ignorant fishermen, simple laborers. In God's eyes, all of that and more. But he was about to transform them by his power from fishers of fish to fishers of men. He was about to transform them by his power into mighty men of God. Men that started out already forgotten by the world. But after God got a hold of their hearts, no one would ever forget the names Peter, James, John, and Andrew. We can't forget about Andrew, even though Luke did in this passage. Andrew, who was Peter's brother. Now, why was Andrew so important? Why was his life so important? Well, first, because God says so. But second, because of the first thing that he did after he was introduced to Jesus. Listen. From John's Gospel, it says, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was one of the 2 who heard what John had said and who had followed Jesus. The first thing Andrew did was to find his brother Simon, Peter, and tell him, "We have found the Messiah, that is the Christ." How awesome is that? Now, we said that in Luke chapter 5, we would see the first 5 to follow Jesus. We talked about 4 so far. Do you remember from your reading who the next one was? The next one to follow Jesus after a personal invitation from Jesus? He was a man named Matthew. Now, Matthew was not a fisherman. Matthew was a tax collector. Think more of a mobster rather than an accountant, bidding what he could bleed as he betrayed his own people to the Romans, only making income if he bled more than he bid as he collected taxes from his own people. Hated by his own people, the Jews, more than they hated the Romans who were occupying their land. And yet here's Jesus walking right up to me, Matthew, right up to my tax office. Oh no, he's going to rebuke me. No, wait, what's he doing? He's calling me? Me? Yes, you, Matthew. Well, that's it. I'm out of here. I'm done with tax collecting. I'm going to follow Jesus now, and I want everybody to know. So let's have a going away party. Oh, Jesus, so many really rotten sinners are going to be there. You want to come? Yes. Yes, I would. So Jesus attends Matthew's going away party, filled with mobsters and sinners, and the religious rulers, of course, complain, picking apart Jesus' disciples, saying, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" Well, they may have not had the courage to ask Jesus directly, but Jesus sure had the courage to answer them directly, saying, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." Now, think this through as it relates to you. The first 5 to follow Jesus were sinners, really rotten sinners, as were the first 500, as were the first 5,000, as were the first 5 million to follow Jesus after a personal invitation from Jesus. And you know what? There's room for one more. Jesus walked right up to you today. He's right next to you right now, and he's looking at you, and he's calling you to turn away from whatever you were following before in order to now follow him. Yes, he knew you, and he knows you better than you know yourself. He knows the depths of your sin, and yes, he's still staring at you, and he's still waiting for an answer. He knew you, he knows you, he still died for you, and he's still calling you. What do you have to say? Well, don't tell me, tell him. Just tell him. Just tell him, "Yes, Jesus, I will follow you. Yes, Jesus, please help me to do so right now." You may think that you're a nothing. You may think that you're a nobody. You may think that you're forgotten by the world, but you're not forgotten by God. He loves you so, so much, and he is about to transform your life radically for the good, for God, for your benefit, and for his glory.